Welcome to the Hindu Daily. Today, we're going to explore how some seemingly hidden policies and big systems really shape things around us. Everything from how science gets funded to women's economic power, even down to how birds sleep. So let's start with something you might not expect. Government procurement policies and how they link to innovation. It sounds a bit dry, maybe?
It can seem that way, yeah.
But traditionally, procurement is all about, saving money, being transparent. But what if that focus actually, maybe unintentionally, holds back research and development? Our first deep dive looks at exactly this catalytic procurement, unlocking innovation in India.
Right. It's this idea of catalytic procurement. It's not just buying stuff. It's about designing public procurement thoughtfully. So it actually pushes the private sector to do more R&D.
How does that work exactly?
Well, by creating stable demand, predictable demand for advanced tech, the government basically encourages companies to invest more in innovation, to do more research. There are studies showing a direct link between this kind of targeted spending and more patent filings.
Interesting.
But India's older framework, it often created hurdles, like the mandatory use of the government e-marketplace, GEM, for lots of things. That often meant specialized scientific tools got stuck in red tape.
So scientists couldn't get what they needed easily.
Exactly. They'd face these tedious exemption processes or, sometimes just settle for equipment that wasn't quite right for really cutting-edge research. It was a bottleneck.
Yeah, that sounds incredibly frustrating if you're trying to push boundaries. But things are changing.
Yes, India's recognized this. There was a pretty significant move back in June 2025. Some key reforms to the General Financial Rules, the GFR.
Oh, okay. What did they change?
So now, institutional heads think university vice chancellors, directors, they can actually bypass GEM for specialized R&D gear.
That's a big deal.
It is. And direct purchase limits, they've doubled them from 1 lakh rupees up to 2 lakh. Plus, they've given these academic leaders more power to approve global tenders themselves, up to 200 crore rupees.
Wow. So the thinking here is shifting. Procurement isn't just an expense anymore.
Precisely. It's becoming a strategic lever. The idea is to actively shape the market, to kind of force innovation instead of accidentally stifling it. It's a fundamental shift in how the government can, accelerate its own scientific future.
Okay, that makes sense.
Absolutely. These changes are really critical. But, we also need to look at the nuances.
Like what?
Well, that 2 lakh direct purchase limit, for example, is it enough? For some really high-cost fields, maybe like quantum computing, perhaps not.
Right.
And the focus on global tenders, great for quality, sure. But there's a risk, isn't there? It could potentially sideline domestic suppliers if India doesn't also, empower its local R&D scene to compete effectively.
Good point. And implementation, always a challenge.
Always. Getting this right will need really robust ethical standards, strong monitoring. That's historically been tricky sometimes. And if you look globally, other countries offer lessons.
Such as?
The U.S. has its SBR program. They dedicate a slice of federal R&D funds specifically to startups. They use staged contracts, which helps de-risk new tech. South Korea, they even pay premium prices for prototypes, pre-commercial procurement, they call it, to encourage those real moonshot projects.
It's really fascinating how procurement itself has evolved, from just basic record keeping in ancient times to being strategic in wartime. And now people are talking about cognitive procurement using AI.
That's right. Imagine tools, maybe using generative AI, that can analyze supplier networks, predict customs holdups, automate compliance checks. That frees up researchers, right? Lets them focus on the creative side of sourcing.
Like the Pfizer example for the COVID vaccine.
Exactly. AI-optimized procurement apparently cut down months of supplier identification work into just weeks. That's powerful.
Now, this sometimes leads to talk about privatizing national labs to open up procurement, but the article suggests that's maybe a false binary.
Yes, and it uses the U.S. Sandia National Laboratories as a case study. Since '93, they've had private management, but the Department of Energy keeps mission control through performance contracts.
A hybrid model.
A hybrid model. And it seems to have worked there. Unlocked private money, led to a big jump in patents. The idea is that India's CSIR could maybe explore something similar for labs in strategic areas, like space tech. You get corporate agility, but with strong government oversight for accountability, making sure it aligns with national innovation goals.
Okay, so stepping back, what's the bigger picture here? What are these reforms really aiming for in India's future? The article points to 4 potential systemic shifts.
Yeah, things like outcome-weighted tenders.
Yeah.
Finland does this. They don't just look at cost. They evaluate bids on quality factors, like how much a supplier invests in R&D.
Interesting. What else?
Then there's this idea of sandbox exemptions for top institutions like TIFR or the IITs, letting them bypass some general rules for a percentage of purchases if they hit certain innovation targets.
Giving them more freedom to experiment.
Exactly. And AI-augmented sourcing, maybe using the NDIA ecosystem to build a smart procurement assistant. And finally, co-procurement alliances, like the EU does, where multiple labs team up to buy together, get better deals.
So procurement can be more than just a hurdle.
Absolutely. It's not a magic wand, but it's definitely a powerful lever for innovation. If India combines these reforms with global best practices and these new cognitive tools, procurement could really shift from being an impediment to being an accelerant for research.
It reminds me of that line from the article.
The one about civilizations.
Yeah.
Civilizations that procured for monuments left ruins. Those that procured for inquiry built futures. India really has a chance here to build that future, driven by inquiry.
And that idea of designing for impact, it doesn't just apply to tech. Our next piece looks at how data, when designed intentionally, could unlock the massive potential of India's women. That's another huge engine for future growth, right?
Absolutely critical. The source points out this staggering number, 196 million employable women in India are currently outside the workforce.
196 million.
It's huge. And you simply can't have inclusive growth if half your population is basically invisible in the data that shapes policy and investment.
So even though female labor force participation has maybe ticked up a bit?
Right, but only about 18% of those working women are in formal employment. The real problem is, without data broken down by gender disaggregated data, these critical gaps just stay hidden, policy changes stall, exclusion gets, baked into the system. We need to go beyond just counting heads.
And Uttar Pradesh is doing something about this, something groundbreaking.
Yes, they've launched India's first district-level Women's Economic Empowerment Index. The WEE Index.
WE Index.
Okay. It's this innovative tool that tracks women across 5 really key economic areas: employment, education, entrepreneurship, livelihood and mobility, and crucially, safety and infrastructure.
So it's trying to build a gender perspective into everything: data, departments, policy.
That's the goal. Embed that gender lens everywhere, and it's already having an impact. Well, take UP's transport sector. Data from the WE Index showed really low numbers of women bus drivers and conductors, just alarmingly low.
Right.
And that insight directly led the department to rethink recruitment and even address basic things like building women's restrooms at bus terminals. Infrastructure gaps matter.
Absolutely.
And the index goes deeper than just participation rates.
Yeah.
For example, it showed women actually dominate skilling programs over 50% enrollment.
But they're not starting businesses at the same rate.
Exactly. They represent just a fraction of registered entrepreneurs.
Yeah.
Why? Often it's limited access to credit. So the index highlights these systemic barriers, giving clear pointers for targeted policy changes.
So the takeaway is we need this kind of gender-specific data everywhere, across all government systems: MSME, transport, housing.
Yes, embedded everywhere.
But also digging deeper, not just participation, but what about retention? Leadership roles? What about re-entry rates, especially after Class 12 or graduation? That's often where you see a big drop-off for women.
Which means rethinking gender budgeting, too. Fundamentally rethinking it. Too often, it's just stuck in the finance department. Real gender budgeting means applying that gender lens to every single rupee spent. Across all sectors: education, energy, infrastructure, everything.
You can't budget for what you don't measure.
Precisely. You can't fix what you don't see. And this WE Index, it provides a really solid framework that other states could replicate. Think about states like Andhra Pradesh, Maharashtra, Odisha. They have these huge trillion-dollar economy goals.
They need everyone on board for that.
They absolutely need to leverage their gender dividend. This framework helps turn data into concrete, district-level gender action plans. It can guide budget allocation, program reforms, helping them actually meet those ambitious economic targets by empowering women.
Okay, from economic empowerment, let's shift to a really important court ruling on student mental health. Back in July 2025, the Supreme Court of India made a decision in Sukhdev Saha versus State of Andhra Pradesh. It's being called a constitutional landmark. Why?
Well, it fundamentally recognizes mental health as an integral part of the right to life under Article 21 of the Constitution.
And the case itself, it had tragic origins.
Incredibly tragic. It started with a father, Sukhdev Saha, devastated by his 17-year-old daughter's suicide in a hostel in Visakhapatnam. He felt the police investigation was inadequate and demanded a CBI inquiry.
But the court went broader.
Much broader. It used the case to address India's really alarming epidemic of student suicides. And it introduced this concept of structural victimization.
Structural victimization, what does that mean?
It means arguing that the system itself, the neglect within coaching centers, schools, universities, creates an environment that makes young people highly vulnerable. The state, the institutions, by failing to provide proper safeguards, essentially become complicit in the harm.
So it's shifting blame from just the individual.
Yes, and this ruling fills a really important legal gap. We have the Mental Health Care Act of 2017, which gives a statutory right to mental health care, but its implementation, well, it's been patchy. By putting mental health squarely under Article 21, the court elevates it. It's no longer just a statutory right, it's a fundamental constitutional right. That empowers citizens, They can now insist on safeguards for psychic health as a basic entitlement.
And the court didn't just state this principle, it issued guidelines?
Yes, binding guidelines, the SAHA guidelines. These are interim orders, but they require all educational institutions, schools, colleges, hostels, coaching centers, to proactively develop proper mental health support systems.
Proactively?
Yes, and states and union territories. They have to enforce rules based on these guidelines within 2 months, plus set up district-level monitoring committees. Until Parliament acts, these guidelines basically have the force of law.
It makes you think of Johan Galtung's theory of structural violence.
How so?
Well, he argued that societal structures that cause harm, like depriving people of basic needs, are just as blameworthy as direct physical violence. So here, maybe by not creating a supportive environment, the system itself perpetuates harm.
That's a powerful connection. This perspective reframes student suicides. They're not just individual failures, they become a kind of systemic injustice. It makes these previously perhaps hidden victims visible as people with rights.
So this judgment has huge potential.
Revolutionary potential, yes. But, and it's a big but, the challenge now is implementation.
Turning words into action.
Exactly. Translating these court pronouncements into real change on the ground. That needs serious resources, investment, training from state governments, from institutions. Without that commitment, this landmark ruling, well, it risks becoming just another missed opportunity, however well-intentioned.
That focus on foundational rights, even mental health, seems to connect to a broader trend, maybe. India asserting its values, not just at home, but globally. Let's pivot now to India's geopolitics, looking through the lens of former Ambassador T.S. Tirumurti's recent interview. How does he see the current state of India-China relations?
Well, Ambassador Tirumurti is pretty direct. He says they are quite far from reaching a new normal.
Still quite far.
Yes. There have been some symbolic gestures, resuming air links, the Kailash Manasur Yatra restarting.
Aye.
But the big issues remain.
Like the border.
The border de-escalation, yes. But also the trade imbalance, market access for indie companies in China. Those are still major sticking points.
Yeah.
And crucially, China's become much more active again in India's neighborhood.
For instance?
Well, things like the critical support they apparently gave Pakistan during Operation Sindoor. And just the basic reality now, India shares a border with a superpower. That fundamentally changes the whole dynamic.
Some people wondered if the U.S. tariffs under previous administrations might have pushed India closer to China. What's Tirumurti's take on that?
He suggests India's actions, like some moves in Tianjin, weren't really about a big shift towards China. It was more about signaling to the U.S.
Sending a message.
Exactly. A message like, look, we have options that don't take us for granted. It wasn't necessarily a substantive alignment with China.
Okay, and how does he see India-U.S. ties right now?
He describes them as facing some turbulence. You've got the 50% tariffs still lingering, trade frictions, sometimes quite public criticism.
Of what's needed.
Tirumurti feels the U.S. needs to really define India's role within its broader strategy and avoid relations being just episodic, turning on and off. He points out that many traditional U.S. allies kind of folded when faced with tariffs to preserve the alliance.
But India didn't.
No. He says India is keen to preserve its ties with the U.S., but not at any cost. And things like the U.S. warming up to Pakistan again, or those punitive tariffs on Russian oil purchases, those just muddy the waters further from his perspective.
What about India's stance on Ukraine? That drew criticism from the U.S.
Tirumurti stands by India's 2022 decision, abstaining on those UN Security Council resolutions calling for diplomacy. He firmly believes that was the right decision.
But he thinks India could do more now.
Yes. He argues India should play a more active role. Not necessarily formal mediation, maybe, but more active engagement, partly to deflect criticism, perhaps. And he draws this interesting parallel.
To the Korean War.
Exactly. India played a really significant role back then, actively engaged, which ultimately led to it chairing the Neutral Nations Repatriation Committee. It shows active engagement can have real impact and build stature.
So looking at the bigger global picture,
Yeah.
how does he see things shifting?
He sees this kind of paradox. On one hand, you have serious disruptions, conflicts, violations of international law. But on the other hand, huge global challenges, climate change, pandemics, AI, cyber threats, are forcing countries to cooperate.
A messy world.
A very messy, complex world. And he urges India as a rising power to be proactive. India has done a lot on global commons, vaccine matri during COVID.
Right, the vaccine diplomacy.
But the world now expects more. They expect India to play a bigger role in resolving conflicts and shaping geopolitics, moving beyond its more traditional role.
So the bottom line for India's ambitions.
His message is pretty clear. If India wants to achieve its goal of becoming a Viksit Bharat, a developed nation by 2047, it absolutely has to get our geopolitics right. It needs to proactively shape its place in this changing world order.
From that grand geopolitical stage, let's zoom right down to something much more subtle but really pervasive. An environmental challenge affecting everyday life. Artificial light at night and how it's messing with birds. Our next piece, When Birds Lose an Hour of Sleep to Light Pollution, is quite eye-opening. What did this study find?
It's a huge global study, looked at 583 species, analyzed something like 60 million bird sounds, vocalizations, and the main finding: artificial light basically nudges birds to stay active for almost an hour longer after sunset in brightly lit places.
An hour longer.
Almost an hour, on average. Dr. Brett Pease, the lead author, said he was initially surprised, but also quite concerned, because disrupting these natural rhythms, well, it can't be good for them. Messes with migration, feeding, breeding, which can then ripple through entire ecosystems.
And how do they even measure this on such a scale? The methodology sounds interesting.
Yeah, it's really cool. They used a system called bird weather. It's basically a network of microphones set up by volunteers all over the place recording bird sound.
Citizen science.
Exactly. And then they used an AI model called BirdNet to analyze all those millions of recordings. Dr. Pease actually compared it to how trail cameras revolutionized studying mammals, suddenly seeing things you couldn't see before. This is doing something similar for bird activity using sound.
So they compared bird song in bright areas versus dark areas.
Precisely. And that's how they pinpointed these shifts with such accuracy.
Were the findings uniform across all birds?
No, there were some interesting variations. While the average shift was about 50 minutes longer activity, some species were active a full 2 hours longer.
Wow.
Birds with bigger eyes, the ones that are more watchful, they seemed most affected, singing about 35 minutes earlier at dawn and almost an hour, 56 minutes later at dusk.
Okay.
Also, birds nesting out in the open felt it more than those in cavities. Migratory birds were more unsettled than birds that stay put, and the changes were most pronounced during breeding season when birds are already stressed.
So not uniform, but a clear overall trend.
Definitely. Brighter nights mean unnaturally longer days for birds, pretty much everywhere they looked.
Now, could that extra activity be good? More time to find food or mates?
Theoretically, maybe. But the bigger concern, as biologist Anusha Shankar pointed out, is the disruption to these ancient circadian rhythms. They're deeply dependent on natural light cues. Less rest, altered timing. It likely has negative impacts that go beyond just being awake longer.
And we see concrete negative impacts already.
Oh, absolutely. Think about bird collisions. Those brightly lit glass buildings in cities, they become deadly traps, especially at night as birds get disoriented. We see this tragically often in India.
Right.
Or migratory birds, their timing gets thrown off. They might arrive somewhere before their food source, which also relies on light cues is available. That affects survival. And then there's the impact on insects like fireflies.
Fireflies? How does light affect them?
Shurram Murli, who studies them, calls them the flagship species of the night. Artificial light directly interferes with their bioluminescence, their flashing lights used to attract mates. It basically hacks their communication, disrupting their whole life cycle. It's devastating for them.
It's really sad. But there's some hope here.
Yes, that's the good news with light pollution. Unlike so many other environmental problems, this one is actually quite reversible.
How so?
As Dr. P said, we're just a light switch away here. Simple things can make a huge difference. Shielding streetlights so the light points down, not up. Dimming billboards, just switching off lights we don't really need. We can give the night back to the creatures that depend on the dark.
That's encouraging. Okay, let's stay with environmental solutions, but shift focus. Greece is using an innovative method to fight invasive fruit flies, a big threat to their agriculture.
Yes, it's a significant problem there. The Mediterranean fruit fly already does a lot of damage, especially to crops like peaches. But the bigger worry now comes from these invasive Asian species, the oriental fruit fly and the peach fruit fly,
Why are they a bigger worry?
because climate change is helping them spread. These species, which used to be limited by colder winters, can now survive the winter in warmer parts of Europe. So they're becoming a persistent year-round threat to food production.
So what's Greece doing? I gather it's part of a bigger EU project.
That's right. It's a 4-year project called REACT, involving 12 countries. And Greece is using a specific technique, it's called the Enhanced Sterile Insect Technique, or SIT. Basically, scientists at the University of Patras rear huge numbers of male Mediterranean fruit flies.
Okay.
Then this is the enhanced part. They feed these males a special bacterial supplement. It makes them more vigorous, more competitive when they're released.
So they release sterile males.
Exactly. Thousands of them are released into orchards. They then mate with the wild females. But because the males are sterile, these matings produce no offspring.
Ah, so the population gradually declines.
Precisely. Over time, it reduces and can even eliminate the harmful fly population in that area. And the great thing is it's completely pesticide-free. It's environmentally sound, works fine with organic farming. It's a sustainable approach.
Where are they testing this?
The main testing ground is in Ausa, a big fruit-growing region. Apparently, the growers were a bit skeptical at first, scientists showing up with bags of flies.
I can imagine.
But they've seen the results: less crop damage, and they're convinced now.
And this could work against other invasive flies, too.
That's the hope. These invasive fruit flies are genuinely among the most destructive pests for global food production. Species like the oriental and peach fruit flies cause billions in damage worldwide. So a method like this, especially as climate change helps these pests spread, it could be really vital for safeguarding our food supply in the future.
Okay, let's shift back to domestic legal matters in India. A really crucial Supreme Court ruling came down on September 1st. It canceled anticipatory bail for someone accused of caste-based crimes. The case is Kiran versus Rajkumar Jivaraj Jain. What are the details here?
Right. The case started with an FIR, a police report, filed by Kiran, who belongs to a scheduled caste community. He alleged that Rajkumar Jain and some others attacked him and his family with iron rods.
A violent attack.
Yes, and he also alleged caste-based verbal abuse, that his mother and aunt were molested, their valuables looted, and they were threatened with having their home burned down.
What triggered this, according to the complaint?
Kiran stated it was because he refused to vote the way Jain and others had directed him to in the assembly elections. It was electoral retaliation, essentially.
And the bail situation.
Well, the Sessions Court initially refused anticipatory bail, finding there was clear casteist intent. But then the Bombay High Court overturned that. They called the case politically motivated, maybe exaggerated. That's what led to the appeal reaching the Supreme Court.
So what was the Supreme Court's reasoning for canceling the bail?
They relied heavily on Section 18 of the SCST Prevention of Atrocities Act, the 1989 law. Section 18 is a really key protection. It specifically bars anticipatory bail if a prima facie case, a case on the face of it, is made out under the Act.
Why is that bar there?
It's primarily to protect victims from intimidation or pressure by the accused before the trial, and to make sure the prosecution can proceed effectively without interference.
And the Supreme Court upheld this bar.
Strongly. They reiterated that Section 18 is constitutionally valid, citing previous judgments. And they made a critical point. Courts at the bail stage shouldn't conduct a mini trial. They just need to see if there's a prima facie case.
Not decide guilt or innocence.
Exactly. And here, they found the High Court had basically ignored key evidence. They also clarified what within public view means for caste slurs, essentially, outside the complainant's house where others could witness it. And they stressed the significance of electoral retaliation under the Act, which specifically criminalizes trying to coerce SCST members' votes.
Were there witnesses?
Yes. Independent witness accounts and medical evidence apparently backed up the prosecution's version, contradicting the High Court's dismissal.
So how does this ruling strengthen accountability overall?
By firmly upholding Section 18, the court is reinforcing the SCST Act as a vital substantive shield for vulnerable communities. It's sending a clear message. Allegations of caste atrocities shouldn't just be brushed aside as exaggerated without a proper trial. The victim's account needs to be taken seriously at this initial stage.
Right.
So this judgment really emphasizes that the rule of law must protect the marginalized. Acts of electoral retaliation, caste violence, they have to be treated with utmost seriousness, and perpetrators shouldn't get an easy path to avoid potential consequences through anticipatory bail. It's about fundamental democratic participation and social justice.
Let's move now to the economy, specifically China's electric vehicle or EV sector. There's this phenomenon being talked about called involution. What exactly is that?
Involution, or Neiwan in Chinese. It's more than just a standard price war. It describes this really intense, almost inward-looking competition where rivals drive prices down so much that firms end up losing money. Retail prices can even drop below what it costs to make the car.
Like everyone's working harder but getting less out of it.
That's a good way to put it. The term was popularized by anthropologist Clifford Geertz, studying Java's rice economy: more labor, more complexity, but no real increase in output per person, leading to stagnation. In the EV context, it means fierce competition, oversupply, and unsustainable business models for many.
How many players are there in China's EV market?
A lot, maybe 120, 130 manufacturers. It's incredibly crowded, hence this battle for survival leading to these aggressive, often damaging price strategies.
Okay, and here's where global trade comes in. How have things like US and EU tariffs affected this situation?
They've definitely exacerbated it. You've got U.S. tariffs at 100% now. The EU has countervailing duties anywhere from 17% to 35% on top of their standard 10% import duty, plus other countries like Turkey, Mexico adding their own tariffs. These act as significant trade barriers.
So closing off export markets forces competition inward.
Exactly. It intensifies the domestic competition even further, pushing Chinese OEMs into deeper price wars within China itself. Industry leaders there are openly using the word involution to describe what's happening. It's become a major concern.
Has Beijing responded?
Oh, yes. The government is clearly worried about the chaos and potential consolidation fallout. The Ministry of Industry and Information Technology, MIET, talked about curbing involution back in May.
And President Xi.
President Xi Jinping himself framed it as a war on price wars in June. Then in July, they released a draft overhaul of their pricing laws, specifically aiming to stop companies from selling below cost. And Xi wrote an article in the party journal Caste calling for an end to disorderly price competition and an orderly exit for firms with outdated capacity.
So a clear top-down push to manage the market.
Definitely signals government intent to intervene. Meanwhile, what are the companies doing? They're trying to localize production overseas DYD, setting up plants in Hungary, Turkey, for example.
And looking for other markets.
Yes, aggressively diversifying exports, especially targeting emerging markets. It's interesting, in 2024, Chinese imports apparently accounted for about 75% of the increase in EV sales in emerging economies outside China.
So it's this complex mix: internal oversupply, fierce competition, made worse by external trade pressures.
Precisely. A real interplay of domestic policy challenges and international protectionism. It's putting China's industrial strategy to a serious test.
Okay, for our final deep dive, let's look at the digital world and a pattern that's become worryingly familiar: the silence or passivity of big social media companies during times of political unrest. The recent insurrection in Nepal, where the government banned 26 platforms, is a starting point, but it's broader than that, isn't it?
It really is a familiar pattern, unfortunately. Beyond Nepal, we've seen it time and again, the companies issue these sort of boilerplate statements.
Yeah.
Saying they value digital rights, they're monitoring the situation, but they rarely take meaningful action to confront the government blocking access.
And the users are caught in the middle.
Exactly. The users bear all the risks. Think about Facebook in Myanmar during the 2021 coup, or Twitter, now X.com, in Nigeria, Instagram and WhatsApp in Iran during protests. In case after case, the platform's relative inaction meant millions were cut off from vital information, from organizing tools, right when they needed them most.
There's a real tension here, isn't there? These are huge multinational companies driven by commercial interests, but their whole brand image is built around empowering free expression, connecting people. So why are they so reluctant to act? Is it just legal risk?
It's more than just jurisdiction or legal worries, though those exist. It seems profoundly linked to avoiding government backlash in markets that are, frankly, very profitable or have huge growth potential. They try to walk this fine line, but ultimately it often feels like users' rights take a backseat to maintaining market access and profits.
But technologically, they could do more.
That's what's so striking. They absolutely have the technical capacity for workarounds. We're talking decentralized infrastructure options, building redundancy across different services, actively supporting circumvention tools like Tor or Signal's proxy relays.
Things that make blocking harder.
Exactly. Google even has its own outline VPN software. YouTube uses content delivery networks that can sometimes disguise traffic. The tools exist or could be rapidly deployed by companies with their resources. But they rarely seem to pull those levers in these high-stakes political crises.
Why not? If they have the tech, why the hesitation?
Well, these solutions often create other problems for the platforms themselves. They can complicate content moderation, which they're already under pressure about. They reduce the precision of the user data they collect, which is crucial for targeted advertising.
Ah, the business model.
Right. It cuts into advertising revenue. It really exposes that conflict. The economic logic of surveillance capitalism, as some call it, clashing directly with users' digital rights when things get politically heated.
How does Big Social's response compare to other industries in similar situations?
It's quite a contrast sometimes. Telecom companies often get forced to shut down service immediately by governments. But look at financial companies, PayPal, Visa. They curtailed services in Russia quite decisively after the Ukraine invasion. Even Wikipedia fought a long legal battle against Turkey's ban.
So others seem more willing to take a stand.
Sometimes, yes. And when you consider the sheer financial power of Big Social Meta's annual revenue is bigger than the entire GDP of countries like Nepal or Nigeria. Their claims of being helpless ring a bit hollow. They have immense capital, lobbying influence, technical expertise, arguably more than many governments they deal with. Yet they seem reluctant to deploy that power to defend their users' access.
And these shutdowns, they don't affect everyone equally, do they?
Not at all. They create huge inequities. Wealthier users, people who are more tech-savvy, they can often find VPNs or other workarounds. But poorer citizens, less digitally literate populations, they're left completely cut off, vulnerable, often drifting towards less secure communication channels and losing access to reliable information precisely when disinformation might be rampant.
And governments know this gives them leverage, especially in the global south.
Absolutely. The global south represents huge, fast-growing user bases for these platforms. That gives governments in these regions significant leverage to demand compliance with takedown orders or shutdowns. It makes users in these countries particularly vulnerable.
So what's the way forward? What needs to change?
Well, the argument is that countries and users need to start demanding more from these incredibly powerful companies.
Like what?
Requiring them to actually prepare technical contingencies for politically motivated shutdowns, building in redundancy, maybe offering encrypted alternatives, or actively partnering with established circumvention tools.
Being prepared, not just reacting.
Exactly. And demanding more transparency from the platforms about their policies on resisting censorship. When will they push back? How? Maybe even industry-wide agreements on minimum standards, like how banks have stress tests.
Could regional groups play a role?
Potentially, yes. Regional blocs think the African Union, SAARC, ASEAN could perhaps negotiate common demands that would make it harder for companies to just play governments off against each other, country by country.
So it's about shifting the power dynamic.
It really is. It's about ensuring that in our increasingly connected but also volatile world, fundamental digital rights aren't consistently sacrificed for corporate profit or political expediency. It's crucial for safeguarding access to information and free expression globally.
Thank you for listening. If you want to provide suggestions, please contact on the Twitter handle given in the episode description. As always, we are eager to hear what our listeners want to be informed about. We wish you a great day.